Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. Today I've got with me Bob Mesta, and we're going to be talking about one of his books, because he's got
Yeah.
many of them, but one of the books he's written is this, which is Demand Side Sales. But Stop Selling and Help Your Customers Make Progress. And I've read it, and it is a really good book. Before we get in and start talking about this, Bob, where can people find you?
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I basically DM me if you've heard me on the podcast. Tell me you've heard me on the podcast. I'm more than happy to link in through you that way. The other part is on Amazon. Between Demand Side Sales, Learning to Build, Choosing College, a lot of my stuff is there, and also on Medium. I'm on Medium as B Mesta.
Fantastic. So, I mean, you've had quite an interesting journey, haven't you? Because you run a whole load of startups. Because you're actually a technical person, aren't you? But from background, but you run a whole load of startups.
Yeah. My mom would tell you that I was a engineer out of the womb, destroying things by the time I was 2, fixing things out of pure desperation to stay out of trouble, which didn't really work. But by the time I was 4, and so I've been building things and cobbling things for a long time. But my first product was I built speakers for my friends by the time I was 10, and sold them and did all that stuff. But I've done 7 startups, and I've worked on over 3,500 different innovations. So I'm a creator, a builder of sorts, in terms of I just like to build new things and help people make progress at the end of the day.
So what was the inspiration behind the book? Because if you're a technical person, why are you writing about sales? What do you know about it?
So there's two really underlying pinnings to it. One is having gone to business school and having done 7 startups, I connected the dots between why are there no sales professors? Why don't we teach school? Why don't we teach sales in school?
Yeah.
And so, and kind of pulling back the thing, you realize that it came back that there were actually sales professors till about 1985. And the moment that basically something called brand equity was invented and then put onto the balance sheet, it was where the flip went from marketing worked for sales to now sales works for marketing.
Right.
And ultimately, how to get, and to be honest, the thing I struggled with most as a technical person was how to sell.
Yep.
And so, having gone through many different courses and not doing it very well, and it's one of those things where I had it in my back pocket all the time through a framework that I helped develop with Clay Christensen called Jobs to be Done, and that people don't buy products, they hire them to make progress in their life.
Yep.
And so the goal was to actually start to think about how do we actually take people who don't like to sell. I thought of like teachers and nurses, and most people say they don't want to sell, but most people want to help. And if you flip the lens around it to say, like, how do you help somebody make progress? All of a sudden, they don't feel like they're selling anymore, and ultimately, it's a different approach. The second part, though, is that when you look at the sales process, I feel like over the last 10 years, it's being run more and more by marketing and finance than it is by sales, and that this whole aspect of being able to understand kind of how do we make decisions, and ultimately the process of sales is how we want to sell. But the reality is what we need to do is frame the process about how people want to buy. And it's almost like a secondary thought for a lot of people. And so it's that second angle of like, what if, so I've gone in and fixed, like as a startup, they don't really have usually a sales process. And so I've been designing sales processes from how people want to buy for a long time. And so it was kind of those two angles that really kind of forced me to write about it. In a million years, I would have never thought I wrote a book on sales. But to be honest, I love it, and I'd love to help people. And it's one of those things where I get so much satisfaction from it.
Because you talk about in the book about there's 2 perspectives on the world, supply and demand.
Yeah.
Talk us through that.
Yeah. So I grew up on the supply side of the world, which is the greatest lie I was told as a product, a builder, was build it and they will come. And very quickly I learned that is just a lie. It's just a lie, right? And that when you really know good salespeople and you really understand what they do, is they actually help people make progress. And so you start to realize, like, at some point, if I build a product, now I got to go find of the 8 billion people in the world who need it. But the demand side is really about the fact of how do people pull things into their lives to basically make change, to make progress. And so when you look at the demand side and you look at the supply side, there's actually this big wall between the two. And that we end up, most people say they're customer focused, but they're always customer focused through their product. Yep. And on the demand side, you study people's lives and to study why do people change and study where the struggling moments are. And you start to realize the greatest competitor in the customer's eyes to a new mattress isn't Serta or Simmons or a mattress company. It's actually a bottle of ZzzQuil, which is a sleep aid. Yep. And so you start to realize that the competitive set from the customer's eyes is completely different. And so the first thing we try to do is actually get people to hop over that wall and stop looking at the world through their product, but to look at the world from their customer's eyes and see what they see and feel what they feel and hear what they hear. And the moment they can get empathy around it, they start to realize like it's a very different set of processes we need to have to actually help them make progress and buy our product.
Yeah, I know that. I remember hearing Gary Vaynerchuk saying that they would at VaynerMedia, they were doing some work with Budweiser, and Budweiser were very were leading their thought, because when they normally talk to beer companies, you talk to a beer company and who's your competition, and they'd say, well, it's Heineken or it's it would be another beer. And actually at Budweiser, what they were saying that it was, I can't remember the term, but it was something about basically the competition was around what are you going to put down your throat?
Share of throat.
As in it could be water, it could be Diet Coke, it could be, what you were doing was basically competing with all of those things.
That's right. And the second part of it though is really the fact is that value is actually not determined by the product, but also the context that the product is consumed in. And so you start to realize that context adds value. And so it's not just share of throat, because at some point, I'm not sure I'm allowed to drink beer at work, or, well, I do, but that's okay. But at the same time, the fact is it's one of those things where it's like, okay, in this context, when I'm trying to socialize, what are my options and how do I think about it? And you start to realize like at some point, it's that context that makes sometimes beer or even like a cigar or things like that is like, it's that context that make it actually that much better. And so learning where and when and why. So most people think markets are defined by who. And I think it's actually a very big mistake to think about the total addressable market as who, because most people are going to keep doing what they've been doing forever. And so the only thing is how do we actually understand who wants to change? And so what causes people to change is more about not who they are, but where, when, and why they need to change is really the total addressable market. And so it's situations, not people.
Yes.
Which you understand perfectly. I mean, you're a proponent of all that kind of thinking, which is so awesome. So that's why I'm so happy to be here.
Absolutely, Bob. You're you're preaching to the converted, but
well, no, I think you were converted before I was at some point, but I think at the same time that I think we all need to get this message out is that being able to understand what, like, first of all, people don't buy randomly. They might not plan it and they'll say it's impulse, but when you actually start to interrogate them, you start to realize that it wasn't random. It just is. Nothing is really random. We just think we call things random, and then what happens is sales becomes an equation. If I call 100 people, I'll get 20 people to pick up. Of the 20 people I'll get picked up, they see it as like working that process, but they don't actually understand that if I can actually call the right people at the right time by understanding what they're struggling with, all of a sudden I can actually close a lot more. And so this is the thing where if we get a system that works, we're happy with only 20% conversion or 80% of failure. And my thing is that's just not acceptable. Again, I'm an engineer, right? So like I saw the process and go like, this doesn't make much sense. It works, but it doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, it's inefficient. I know. I've had Andy Paul on here, and he's exactly the same. I mean, he's an introvert like me. And he just sees there's so much inefficiency in the traditional process, but that is about finding, when someone says it's a numbers game, or when someone says we need to make 100 calls of which we'll get through the 20, whatever, he said basically all they're doing is playing the odds. That's not selling.
No. So this is where, like in the book, I talk about this where as we were setting up the early days of websites, I was building homes. I did almost 1,000 homes in 3 years. And one of the things we did is I actually created friction. And my web guy was constantly like, no, we need to get more leads. And I'd have 1,000 leads a month, which meant I had a lot of people to call, a lot of people follow up. And out of the 1,000 leads, I might get 20 sales.
Yeah.
And so part of it was like, I actually want to get people who are ready to buy and tell me why they want to buy and what do they hope is going to be in their new house, and start to help them envision it. And by creating the friction, I went from 1,000 leads to 200 leads, but I closed 80 of them.
Yes.
Right. And so this is kind of the point, is that we think anybody who's willing to give us their email is a good thing. And I'm like, no, they have to want to work to make the progress. And even the people who didn't buy from us, they would literally go like, God, okay, now I understand. Like, would you mind actually talking to my sister? Would you mind talking to my friend? And so we'd get referrals all the time, but they had to follow this process. And so these are the kinds of things where, making it easier, getting less friction. I just think those are all very, they're not principles. They're exaggerated solutions that work for some things, but not necessarily all things.
Yeah. So you, in the book, you set this idea about creating frameworks for demand side selling. Do you have an example of one you could bring up? Because I'd love to use that as a for people to actually better visualize what it is.
So one of the key frameworks is around what I call the timeline, and it's the buying timeline versus the sales funnel. So if you think of this, I think of the sales funnel as something on the demand side of how we manage the process to sell. But in how people buy, there's a timeline of what I call first thought, and then there's passive looking, and then they move to active looking, and then they move to kind of deciding and making trade-offs, and then they choose. Yeah. And what happens is sometimes they go from deciding back to active looking. Yeah. Right? It's not this notion of they always move forward. Sometimes they move back.
Yep.
And so this whole notion of understanding where people lie in the timeline. So they're trying to make progress, but are they actually very early in the process in terms of just passively look like, I don't know enough of, is it a big enough problem? How do you solve it? What's the language? Versus I'm active looking like, oh, what can it do? What can it do? Kind of thing. And I work with a company called Autobooks, and what we did is we actually figured out what we call the jobs, the 3 different jobs of why people hire Autobooks. And it mostly banks. And so why do banks do it? They actually help small businesses run invoicing through SMS through their bank. And so it's almost like what you do with PayPal, but now you have access to the money faster. It actually makes it easier to get to. It actually can help you with the accounting, et cetera. And so by actually doing that, we realized that the thing that they were struggling with was the demo. Is they tried to have one demo, like the standard process of like, okay, we have email lead marketing. We basically get emails in. We basically get people to schedule demos, and then we want to close. But when we did some analysis around kind of the demo, we realized there's actually a demo when I'm in passive looking is like, I need to learn about it, versus a demo in active looking is very, very different, where it's like, I got to show you all the possibilities. And a demo, when we get to choosing, is actually a different one. And so you start to realize they were trying to build one demo when they actually needed 3. Yeah. And just by making that change, we were able to kind of almost cut the time to close in half and 4x the conversion rate. Right. And it's just being able to understand those things. And so it's again, sitting in their seat and understanding where they are. It's what's interesting is the moment they see it, they get it, but they just never kind of flip around to the other side of the table and go like, what's it like to buy your product?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I was holding up one of the diagrams that you were.
I can let's see if I have.
So do you have one of your diagrams?
So I can do. I think I can do that so they can see it.
Yeah, you can.
Right?
Yes.
So that's the timeline, and here I think I can put my name.
Can you make that bigger, Bob?
Yeah, I can. Hopefully, tell me if it comes up right this way. Can they see that?
Yeah. Yes. You can get it up as a third person if you.
Oh, I can. Okay, hold on. Let me do that. Let me
share the screen. And you and I will go.
Yeah. So I can go here to share. Perfect. I can share my screen and go like that, and then I can do this, and then I can go over here this way.
Yeah. Hold on.
Better.
So if you go down to so I've got it now up large on the screen.
Perfect. And so this is where The interesting part is, as you look at these phases, the interesting part is most people are trying to get people to close or to deciding as fast as possible. And what you realize is this is very much like sleep. There's certain phases they have to go through, and to go from first thought to deciding is almost impossible for people. And so it's actually, but I always talk about as a salesperson, your job is to help them navigate this process that they have to go through in order to make a commitment to something new and to actually give up on something old. Right. So what we're talking about is not things where like I run out of Tide and I need to, buy another box of Tide, or it's like, no, I need to, re-up on my Gmail because I use Gmail. This is like, no, I'm going to get rid of my Apple iPhone and go to Android, or I'm going to get rid of my CRM and go to a new CRM. And so these are all about what I would call is, substantial changes in people's lives that literally cause them to kind of abandon one thing and move on to something else or switch.
Yep.
So
that's great. And then you've got, if you go on in your slide deck and you actually show a diagram of your, that's it. So where you talk us through this.
Yeah. So this is where I see, basically, this is what I call the supply side, where there's a business system that produces a product, and that product has features and benefits and experience and attributes. But what you start to realize is that there's this wall between what the consumer causes the consumer to actually buy something new. And it starts with, they either have a current product or they're doing nothing. And there's some context that then causes them to actually have a struggling moment. Right. And that struggling moment has to be big enough and painful enough. And it's the difference between complaining about something and going like, yeah, I can do better, or I got to do better, or there's got to be a better way, to then saying, all right, now I have some new desired outcomes. And ultimately they have desired outcomes, but the reality is like, I only have candidates to do it. And there's never a perfect solution ever. And so ultimately the hard part is deciding gets to basically this notion of they have hire and fire criteria. I would pick this because, or I wouldn't pick this because, and ultimately trade-offs they have to make. And so by understanding that process, to go back to this, is that's the process they follow. And so by understanding both the supply side and the demand side, now I can build a better system or way in which to sell.
Yes.
Sorry.
And in the book, you actually talk about how by actually mapping out the supply side, what you're able to do is also map out the demand side. And you come up with a whole bunch of, this is one of the things I loved about your book, that you come up with a whole bunch of, you walk through saying, this is what the case study is. This is the type of company and the product. And then what we do is, here's you have one of those supply side and progress demand side diagrams. And I'm just trying to hold one up so it comes up to the, and then what you do is you actually build that and show that as an example in the book.
Yep. And the key is to actually understand the requirements and what are the customer's requirements versus our requirements. And one of the things I had learned very early in my career as an innovator and a builder of product is like, how do I specify what the customer wants without any technological solution in mind? And so that's ultimately how we describe needs, or how we describe and flesh out basically what people want or what things they're willing to trade off in order to make the progress.
Yes. Yeah. And I just think it's a fantastic way. Most salespeople are visual. And I just think it's I'll close that down. Were you going to say anything else? Okay. No, and I think that most salespeople are visual, and what that does is give a very visual way of saying, this is what we've got in our products and stuff, which is all very interesting. But here, what we have is the way that the client buys, and that obviously has an impact.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my camera's kind of locked, so I'm just gonna be 1 second and see if I can fix that as we go.
Sure. But I thought I'd lost you completely for a second, Bob.
No, that's good. So we're gonna go to this camera, and then I'm gonna go back to the other camera. Let's see. So part of this is I'm dyslexic, right? And so how does a dyslexic person actually, write a book? And part of it starts with me drawing pictures. and by drawing, can you see me? We're good.
Yeah, I can. Yes.
And so by drawing, so almost the entire book was written with I'll say a job to be done. Like, why would somebody pick up the book? What progress are they trying to make? And then ultimately drawing a set of diagrams that help me articulate what it is. And then me talking with a writer or a set of writers to help me kind of articulate what I want and telling examples. And then they went off and wrote it for me.
Yes.
Now, and in all other worlds, that's seen as cheating. And in my world, I'm saying like, oh God, thank God I can get it out, because I could never write a book otherwise. And having learned this process through Scribe Media, I now have 4 books. I got another 3 on the way. And it's one of those things where writing a book is actually, it's not cheap, but it allows me to get these thoughts out of my head because of all of the different things that I've been doing for 40 years.
So you've got another book out at the moment. So what, just have you got a copy there that you can hold up or something?
Yeah. So this book, this other book here, is that?
By the way, Bob has lots of different cameras.
Yeah, I've got lots of cameras. I'm one of those people who, when the pandemic came, hold on, let's do it this way. Black, this, that. Now I got both, right?
Yeah, you see, look at this. This is a master of.
So I have 4 children, and the last one finally graduated from university, and so it was one of those things where I'm like starting to clean out the house, right? You're like, well, we don't need all this stuff, and so I come across my notebooks. I have over 847 notebooks from when I was, 18 to today, and I'm like, what am I going to do with these? I'm like, let's get the dumpster. My wife's like, no, you should look through them, and started looking through them, and I realized that as a dyslexic, illiterate kid from Detroit, I was told to be a baggage handler at the airport, which is something I actually would have loved to do. But instead of that, I've gone off and worked on 3,500 different innovations. And so I just haven't looked at it from how did I get these skills? Who taught them to me? And who have I worked with who have kind of these different skills? And it's more like, what are the 5 bedrock skills that I look for when I want to go innovate with people? And so it turns out that these 5 skills, and the 5 skills are empathetic perspective, uncovering demand, causal structures, prototyping to learn, and identifying and managing trade-offs. And if you really want to be a good innovator or entrepreneur or a builder of product, it's these skills that, to be honest, have differentiated for the people I've worked with from being good to being great. And what's interesting is when I kind of pulled this together, I realized everybody actually does this already when they're trying to just plan the week's worth of groceries. Who's going to be home? What are we going to eat? What do they like? What do they don't like? Okay, what do I have to cook? What's the recipe? Like we're using these skills, but what's happened is that innovation entrepreneurs kind of like double down and 10x their abilities in these skills. And so I talk about it as how it's helped me build product, and then I've talked about it how others have used it that I've worked with, and then I talk about kind of how to help up your game in those skills. It's doing really well.
Bob, thank you so much for coming on today. I've read the demand side sales book, and I really loved it, which is why I approached you to come on here and talk about it. I love that diagram. I just think it's a great way of visualizing it. I've not read your new book, but I'm sure it's just as good.
So what's interesting about the new book is that how did I come to the ways of coming up with that stuff for sales? These are almost the foundational principles that I use to build everything, and how I looked at the demand side sales aspect. So this is almost like the building blocks to get to demand side sales.
Get to it. Yeah. Fantastic. Bob, thank you so much for coming on today and showing us all your cameras.
Sorry. Distracting.
No, I know that there's more. So it's like, so anyway, Bob, where can people find you?
LinkedIn and Amazon are the 2 best places to find me, and Medium if you're a blog poster. Oh, I forgot. I launched a podcast. So it's called The Circuit Breaker. So if you want to do that, we just finished season 1. We're working on season 2, and it's literally a half an hour of us just kind of jamming around certain topics, and you get to kind of be a fly on the wall and listen in.
Fantastic. So, great. We'll get. I'm sure the audience will check that out as well. So Bob, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Tim.
It's been fantastic, and thank you for sharing your thoughts, because I really think it's something that everybody should be looking at.
Yeah, appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Yep.